Welcome to the Beyond the Reef podcast, where I talk to experts and researchers in the reef aquarium hobby, discussing a broad range of topics from corals and reef biology to water chemistry and equipment. We take a deep dive into our guests' methods, techniques, and top reef keeping tips. My name is Adam Sutherland, and I am the owner-operator of Frag Garage Corals, based out of British Columbia, Canada. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Beyond the Reef. Today I am joined by Chris Meckley of ACI Aquaculture, who I'm sure many of you know already. He's a wholesaler based out of Florida, and he has amazing corals and he grows them like crazy. So I thought Chris would be a really good person to do this series with. It's going to be a multi-part series where we're going to talk about coral care, species identification, and we're going to go through every species that are, most of the more common corals that we keep in our tanks. I've grouped some of the common types together to kind of keep this flowing as fast as possible, but we knew it was going to be a pretty big venture to get into it. It's definitely going to be a good one to watch on YouTube because I put a lot of videos and photos and naming as we talk about the corals. And I'd like to thank Kenny Lynn from Pieces of the Ocean for providing some photos and videos for me. Make sure you check them out at piecesoftheocean.com, and they have a sale coming up next week, which is probably pretty awesome. As per usual, I ask that you hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. It's probably one of the best zero-cost things you can do to support this podcast. As well, if you can share this episode in social media, that would also really help us out. Hit that like button, comment in the comments section, and if you have any disputes of some of these classifications, I'd love to hear from you on those. If you want to make a financial contribution to this podcast, you can send us a PayPal payment at beyondthereefpod@gmail.com, and you can also do a monthly subscription on our Patreon at patreon.com/beyondthereefpodcast. I hope you enjoy this episode with Chris Meckley from ACI Aquaculture, and make sure you check back in a couple weeks for the follow-up episode. Well, thanks for joining me, man. This is awesome. I actually wanted to say we had a conversation about, like a year and a bit ago, and I just kind of wanted to talk to you out of the blue. You didn't really know me, and we had this great conversation. Amanda was there too, and it kind of inspired me to do this podcast, and that and a few other conversations like it, because I was like, I think if people were sitting here listening, they'd probably be really interested in that conversation.
Yeah.
So thanks for taking my call that day.
Hey man, not a problem. Not a problem. It's always good to talk with other fellow reefers that are, have the same mindset.
Yeah. Passionate and curious. Yeah.
Yes, always, very passionate and very curious about everything, always learning, never an expert. It's kind of like what I like to say. It's going to be fun. This is going to be interesting to see. I mean, your list kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I'm going, we're never going to be able to cover this in like 4 hours.
Yeah, this might be a two-part, maybe a 3-part, but if you're down, I'm down. So the idea is that we're going to do kind of a coral care guide, and I feel like you're probably one of the best people to do this with too. And we'll go, my main discussion points will be obviously getting the correct naming, like we were talking about before we started, getting the updated scientific name.
Latin names.
Yeah. We'll describe some of the characteristics, lighting, par, flow, placement, any kind of special tips and tricks for that particular species, feeding, nutrient requirements, probably tips on fragging certain things. And then difficulty level. I think that would pretty much cover, any coral.
Yeah.
So,
for sure.
Yeah. So why don't we just dive right into it here? And
works for me, man.
Like I was saying, we're going to play the some videos and pictures of some of our corals as we talk about them. So it'll be a good one for YouTube too. So yeah, right on. Cool. Okay, sure. So let's start with kind of, I guess, the sort of shallow water species, which is a big majority of them. And so tenuous, is it Befaria is the new scientific?
That is the new Latin name for it in Indo-Pacific region. The one that we were getting out of Australia is actually Kentai.
Okay.
So it was a completely different species, and I always knew that. Jake and I used to talk about it all the time, and he'd be like, it's Vermiculata. And I'm like, nah, not Vermiculata. It's completely different, and it was always a fun debate back and forth with him and I. But Kentai is what we get from Eastern Australia.
Yeah.
that they call tenuous over there, but it's actually completely different DNA.
So is tenuous not even a term that's used to describe any of that species anymore, or is it specific to a certain region?
I don't even think it's in there anymore.
Okay.
I think tenuous has been abolished.
It's going to be a hard one to shake, man. Like, I think new SPS people, like the first couple species they learn are going to be tenuous, millies. That's kind of the starting point, and then you go from there. So Befaria, okay, let's try to push that one. And then what do you say the Aussie version is?
It's Kenti, Kenti.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and
I was schooled on that one the other day.
Yeah,
well, probably a couple of weeks ago. It was a post that was put up by Cameron B. He was in Australia. He was putting a post up, and I'm like, he's called it Kenti. And I'm like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
They reclassified it again.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, it's just the Australian.
Yeah,
the Australian waters is called Kenti.
One of the other things too is like some of these species, like I will get into this too, but like Microclados in Australia versus Indo seems like a totally different species to me.
They are.
So it's like just needs to be updated. Really, it's we're just working with what we have here.
Yeah, you also have to take into consideration that you take it from the wild. It has a growth structure that is for the environment that it's growing in, and we cannot duplicate that in our aquarium. So, I have one of the OG Microclados, strawberry shortcake.
Yeah.
Does not grow like strawberry shortcake. When it comes in, it looks completely different than what my stuff growing out looks like. It has everything to do with water flow.
Yeah, because it's a lot thicker when it comes in. But let's get to Microclados when we get there. So let's start on this Befaria. The characteristics are kind of those kind of scale-shaped coralites. We know all the popular corals, the home wreckers, the Walt Disneys, probably one of the most sort of favorite top species in the hobby. Everybody knows it, so we don't have to describe it too much. But what's your experience, would you say, lighting wise? Like, what's your kind of par range and where you've sort of seen the best color versus growth or combination of the two?
They're the most finicky corals that I farm. I honestly, I almost just gave up on trying to farm Befaria. I've had so many fragments that I've put on the farm that just start doing amazing, and then for no reason start receding. Yeah. And never could figure out why and what was going on. It could be the fact that flow changes continuously. When we pick up a colony and put it back, is it back in the exact same place? And that's probably the biggest hurdle that we have to go through, and that's why our new acro system is going to eliminate those issues, because we'll be able to put them back exactly how we removed them. Mm-hmm. Instead of putting them back and hoping that they're in the same position. Yeah. Because that's one of the biggest problems with Acropora in a farming situation like we are. If we pull it out and take a frag off of it, and it doesn't go back the same way, well, that could cause this thing to start growing all kinds of weird, lanky branches. I've got a Befaria that's growing kind of like this, in a zigzaggy pattern. The branches aren't perfectly straight and uniform. Yeah. It's just because it's been changed so many different times. Mm-hmm. And even though it's in our farm, we still dip everything. I mean, I still go through preventive maintenance on them, because you never know. I mean, we're talking about 18,000 gallons of water. I can't promise that there's not something slipping by. Yeah. And I want to, but So with what I don't really differentiate with par. Mm-hmm. From any species. It's either it's live or die. Yeah. My corals, when we put them on the farm, they're all pretty much going to be getting anywhere between 650 par down to maybe 450. Oh, wow. Where they are. Yeah. And in other areas, they could be as much as 850, 900, all the way down to 650. So depending on whether I have 400 watt halides or 270 or 250 watt halides over top of that particular part of the system. And I do use 400s and 250s on acros, and I'm fixing to put up some thousands here in the next couple of weeks. So have you found any difference? Like, I feel like Befaria might have a point for certain morphs where the par range in the lower range is actually going to bring out better color. It might not necessarily get as fast a growth, but in my experience, sometimes I'm running a little lower par than you. I'm kind of in the I would say my Befaria, I'd rather not say tenuous because I'm so tempted. I would say they're kind of between 300 and 500, kind of at the max. That's normal. I mean, they don't have to go as high as what we go. And I never pushed for it to be that high. It's just that's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
With the height of the halides off of our water. Again, we don't use LEDs.
Yeah.
Because we're trying to grow the corals as quickly as we possibly can and get good quality, good color out of them at the same time.
Yeah.
And it's been a recipe for success. But I've not really had any acros in lower than it's like 350.
Yeah.
Ever. None of them. Not even the ones that are so-called deep waters.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I would say something about the halides is there's a bit of a different way that light, penetrates and hits the coral. So I think maybe the higher par that you're hitting them with, I mean, par is kind of par, but like I think the hot spotness of LEDs is going to affect the corals a little bit differently than the halides. I think the halides have a more of a nice like blanket over the coral.
Right. This is very true.
Yeah. So I guess it sounds like a lot of your par numbers are going to be higher than mine. So I'll kind of share, my experience, and then you can kind of, we're going to assume most of yours are higher than mine by a mile, but yeah.
But LEDs, they have hot spots, like you said. And it's, they grow corals. A lot of people will say that I say that they don't grow corals, which is the biggest, just twist my words around some more.
Yeah. You're a controversial guy, man. Controversial Meckley.
I am. It is what it is. I have, there's a lot of what I say about LED versus halide is all has to do with spectrum. And actual, like we talked about, hot spots versus no hot spots.
Yeah.
It's more of a blanket of even lighting. And, as you get away from it, it dissipates off a little bit. And LEDs kind of do the same thing depending on where the puck is, and what kind of diffuser you have on it. And we do use coral care LEDs in here, which have probably in my opinion, the best spread and best uniform light disbursement out of any other light other than maybe the sky.
Yeah.
Because I remember Terrence, when he was developing the sky, when he was with Neptune, he loved his coral cares over his tank. And because of the diffusers that are used by the coral cares, it actually takes all of the light that's hitting the diffuser on the side where the LEDs are, and it actually pushes that light like this the whole way through the diffuser, which actually blends all that light together, so you don't get the hot spots like you do with, say, Radions or any of the other LEDs that are on the market.
No disco light effect. It's
no, they're all disco lights. I'm sorry. every LED is a strobe light.
Yeah.
And that's another thing people don't realize. It's like, okay, we wouldn't like looking at a strobe light all day long. That's part of the reason why I won't use them. Because I just, the less output, if they're not running at 100%, the strobing effect is more noticeable.
Yeah.
When they're running at 100%, that strobing effect is so fast that it's not easy to be noticed.
Yeah. It's like
I think that's
fast flicker. Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, just for the more standard user, probably my par numbers may be a little more applicable to the common hobbyist, but a lot of people are still running halides.
There's more and more running halides. I mean, there's so many people that message me all the time saying thanks for pushing the halides back, because I finally found a place that sells bulbs. And as a matter of fact, that a company just came out, Hamilton Technologies, that they went out of business. Dave has now reopened as Aqua Bright Solutions, and he just messaged me. He's like, hey, I got a whole mess load of bulbs coming in. I'm like, good. I need 175s and I need 250s. And he's got them just in stock like last week.
Nice.
He sent me one sample bulb down, and I like the bulb. It's not like a radium. I love my radiums. Unfortunately, radiums are few and far between. I've got a stockpile of them, but they won't last me another year or two. And then I'll be having to search for new 20K bulbs to use.
Nice. Well, I'll link to the company in the notes in the video here. But okay, let's get back on track here. So you kind of talked about the flow probably being one of the big things for tenuous. I mean, this is going to apply to all acros, but keeping the position the same, not moving it too much, and making sure that flow is kind of getting through every part of the colony, constantly. There's no low dead spots or anything like that. And I think like you're saying, it's a little more prone to RTN more than maybe some other acros if flow isn't that great. So you have to really watch as they grow too.
Minor and trace elements are a problem with them too. They don't like selenium. Well, if your selenium is elevated, that tends to usually cause a little bit of an issue. And I realized that when we were messing around with minor traces in the beginning, and our selenium levels were elevated slightly above what natural seawater would be, and that was the only thing I could attribute to the reason why we're having issues with the bifarias. Yeah. And when we got that level back down to more natural sea level, seawater standards, we didn't have as many issues, but I still have, I can go back and look at the tenuous, and one day and the next day I go back and I'm like, why is it receding?
And they can go fast too. I guess other trace I would say are really important for them is the blue tip on any tenuous bifaria, with the blue tip. The fluoride seems to be the big factor on that one that I've noticed.
Fluoride's definitely a huge factor with blues. The biggest problem with fluoride is it's one of the most sticky elements and one of the hardest elements to actually test for. Even in an ICP MS is almost impossible to get accurate numbers with it. It needs to be done with a lab that can do LCS-MS testing, which is even more fine-tuned and doesn't have as much interference as, say, ICP does. My friend Gene at Reef Labs, he's got MS as well, but he's not happy with the results he's getting from the fluoride. So he's going to end up, just getting the LCS-MS equipment that he has dialed in so he can start testing for fluoride. I add fluoride on a daily basis. Fluorine. I don't add fluoride. I just add straight fluorine, the element. And it is, it's scary because it's very, very, it's nasty. I mean, if you overdose it, and you can wipe out a tank quick.
And I've heard also overdosing fluoride can damage a coral in a way that no matter what you do afterwards, it doesn't seem to come back, And
that's why I'm very conservative with my fluoride doses.
So another thing I would say, another trace that I've sort of noted and had conversations with about that can be really detrimental, to almost any coral, but the bifaria seem to be affected by tin really negatively if tin levels get up.
Anything. Tin's considered a toxic metal. It's not even something that you don't want to see it in your water. Just like aluminum. There's a lot of things that can be elevated in your system that come from what we add to our systems. And one of the unfortunate things about dosing kalkwasser is unless you're buying ACS grade kalkwasser, which who can afford it, that's the purest form you can get, which will be basically 100% calcium hydroxide. It's also gets compromised extremely quickly because it is so pure. I won't use that because of it's just not practical for the expense.
But you use the Captivate stuff, and that's pretty damn good calc, right?
It's extremely good. It does have aluminum in it, but it's minor. It's a small, tiny amount. It's not gonna. I've never had an elevated aluminum level in my systems, and I dose 15 to 20 gallons, 25 gallons in one system and 15 gallons every night of kalkwasser. And it's a lot of water. It's a lot of kalkwasser.
And I've seen aluminum levels on people's ICPs get pretty freaking high before and not actually seem to cause any issues. So, I wouldn't say it's one of the worst elements to have elevated, but still probably not.
It can be. Definitely can be.
So fragging.
Potassium's a good one for bifaria.
Yeah, for sure, definitely, and I think that affects the blues and some of the I think the real fine tuning point with that species is kind of getting some of those rainbow colors, for example, like the home wrecker. It's easy to have a green coral with a blue tip, but to really get that peachy orange violet kind of coralite, that's kind of the fine tuning thing. And to me, it's just the combination of all your trace being in a good range. And the right kind of par range.
Exactly.
I
agree.
So as far as fragging, they seem to recover well from fragging. I tend to find that, a colony can take a pretty good hit as far as, getting chopped up and they seem to encrust and recover pretty fast.
Agreed. We have, I started this thing a couple of, about a month, maybe 5 weeks ago, called Frag to Order. And so many people asking me for certain corals that we've been farming, and I just didn't have enough of them to put a launch out where I could frag a colony down and make 100 frags out of it. It just wasn't feasible. And it seems like every time I get a Bifaria growing and it gets into a really nice colony, a hurricane comes by and the coral looks great, and power's out for 3 days, and 3 days after the power comes back on, the entire freaking colony goes. And that's happened to Helmwrecker, Orange Passion, what is the other one? Walt Disney. Yeah. On 3 separate occasions from 3 separate hurricanes.
Jesus,
where powers were out. So, well, I had this one that I did just do this. This was what prompted me to do the frag order, was the Dirty Insanity, which is probably, I don't know if you've seen it.
Yeah, I have it. Yeah, I've gotten it from Vincent. Yeah.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
How'd you get it from Vincent?
It's on,
okay.
Yeah, you can order it from Valley Aquarium. Yeah, it's on their list.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm. He does have it on the list?
It's on the list, yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, well, yeah. Me and Joe Caprado got the first 2 pieces of it in the U.S. in 2020 when it reopened.
Yeah, I probably got it around 20, maybe later in 2020 when I first had it, yeah.
I almost lost it multiple times. I mean, I had like this half-inch little piece of it left, and it's finally now I've got it back out into 2 colonies. I've had it for 4 years, and we just put it on the market, and everybody's going nuts over it because it really is one of the most insane aquariums I've seen.
Insanity. Well, yeah, and something I would say as well as fragging them when they get to a certain size seems to help the longevity. Like if you kind of have all your eggs in one basket in one big colony. I've made this mistake with like Walt Disney before, where it's a beautiful colony, it's getting to like 6 inches or something, but looking back on it, because I've lost colonies before, once that colony starts going, there isn't much you can do. But if you have like 3 or 4 medium-sized colonies, they're probably going to be fine. So I don't know if it's just a nutrient needs thing where like, if the system's not supplying enough, or if it's flow. Yeah.
I mean, that's what I attributed to my losses too, was when the power was out. It was 3 days with no water flow going through all the branches. Yeah, and then power comes back on, and in that 3 day period of time, something was going on down inside the colony because there was just no water moving through it, even though the main return pumps were on, all the wave pumps that were in the system were running. So
but I think maybe some of those bad bacteria strains like the Vibrio and Arcobacters and stuff, they probably like that lower flow, lower pH environment. So
of course they do.
Maybe it's just kind of an opportunity for them to start affecting the tissue and start that chain reaction, which we all dread.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so what would we say for overall difficulty level? We'll do a 1 out of 10 on all these species. I'm going to say 8. They're like, you're going to say 8. Okay.
Oh, yeah. For Bifaria, it's an 8. For an SPS keeper, if you haven't kept SPS long-term, it's not something I would recommend anybody getting right away. Yeah. Because it's going to be a heartbreaker for you. And it's a lot of money that you have to spend, especially for some of these named corals. They're still quite expensive.
Yeah. Totally. And I think as a reference point, we'll probably say like the Malaysian Speciosa are a 10. And then what we say is a 1. What's like the easiest coral? Like as far as acros. Yeah, like a Bally Green Slimer. Yeah, Yonji or something. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, let's move on. So this is one, I kind of debate the scientific naming of this a little, because apparently they classified Spathulatas along with Milliporas now. And I feel like, they just totally seem like a different coral to me. Like it's the same kind of, ring-shaped corallite, very similar, like a lot of polyps, a lot of fuzzy polyps, but Spathulata are always like a fatter, thicker branch to me. And they're a little more, I'm sure they table when they get big, like when they're in the wild, I'm sure they're big tables.
Oh, they're huge tables.
But when they come in as like a 4 or 5 inch colony from, say, Australia, they're more like a little mini stag kind of formation.
It's very deceiving because of the way that they do grow. If you take a look at those colonies when you get them in, if you lay it down, it's flat.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
The branch tips on, they kind of curl up. If you let it the way it would be growing, it's perfectly flat. It's just very spaced apart. And the tables that I've seen that my Australian suppliers have sent me videos and pictures of while they're collecting them. We're talking like 3-foot diameter pieces that are huge flat tabling, but there's 3 inches between the branches that are sticking up. It's just And I attribute that to the reason why, I said it a long time ago. So Jake and I were talking about this, and we were talking about how we think that, Spathulata is no different than Meliopora. It's just that the environment that they're growing in.
Yeah.
It goes back to, if you have it in an aquarium, there's a lot of people that couldn't tell the difference between a Meliopora and a Spathulata when they're growing out. I had a Spathulata that grew like thinner than my pinky nail, and it's called the Scarlet Spath. And I grew it for like 2 years, and I started making fragments of it. It got to a nice perfect table. But it was a Spathulata that I got from Australia, and I put a frag down and grew it out, and it looked just like a Millie. So flow has a lot to do with the growth again.
Yeah. Why would you think they classified Spathulatas along with Meliopora? Because, it seems like a step away from, unless they did genetic sequencing on them and figured
DNA.
out. Yeah. So it is a DNA thing. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, I do love me some Spaths and Millies. So let's see. Oh, another one I would kind of put in a similar category, because I'm going to group some of these together, because I think we can kind of agree Millies and Spaths are pretty similar care. Prostrata was the other one. Yeah. So Prostrata, I think, is often confused for Meliopora, but to me, it almost is like a thinner branch than the Meliopora.
It is Meliopora. Same thing.
It is. Okay. So they've just decided.
DNA wise, it's classified the same. It's definitely from all the DNA that's been done with it and all the research that's been done with it, it's no longer classified as something as a separate species.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of cool too. I mean, you can't really argue with Millies and Spaths, and like no matter where they're from, if they're from Fiji or Indo or Oz or Solomons or whatever, they're all pretty distinctively, undeniably, the same kind of coral. So yeah, so I feel like as far as lighting wise, like they might be one of the corals that can take the absolute most par.
Again, they can take a lot. I mean, this is the thing with, when they were considered to be Meliopora and Spathulata, one of the biggest differences between, say, what we called Meliopora was the fact that my friend over in Australia, Nick, would tell me when he would go collecting, he had a spot that was a Millie reef, and it was just covered in Acropora Meliopora, but it was a very silty reef. It was not crystal clear water like you saw in the Outer Swains Reef, where you would see Spaths. Yeah, it was very murky, but you still got really intense light on the reef itself, but you still had all of that stirred up, planktonic, as well as the stirring, the heavy currents going through there, stirring up the bottom, causing the water to look silty. They call it dirty water, but it's, when you break it down, it's not
nutrient-rich water, I guess would be a better way to put it, right? Yeah.
Parameters are about the same.
Yeah.
I mean, it's dirty water in the ocean is silty water. It doesn't mean it's got super high nutrients or anything like that. It's a misconception of what it really is.
Yeah, dirty is a bit of a loose term, right? Yeah.
It very, very, exactly. So that was the difference between, the Millie colonies that were collected in the inshore reefs and then the Outer Swains reefs for Spathulatas.
Yeah. Which makes sense because, like you're saying, the Spathulatas are a little further out. They're little thicker branches, maybe. I don't know. That kind of makes more sense based on, the shallow species being a little, well, they're the same species, but the shallower Millies are kind of like a little more tighter and kind of ready for that hardcore wave action coming through.
Yep.
Yeah.
Big time. It's like, out in the Outer Swains, if you're on the edge of where the barrier reef is, they call it the hard line. If you're on the hard line, after that, there's nothing. It's just open ocean. And you got to think about the upwellings that can come across there and how much actual current goes through there. And it's such an intense flow that hits the reef. Yeah. Then the reef dampens it, and then it's not hitting the mainland of Australia. I mean, that's of course, coral reefs protect the mainland and the short coastlines. So the outer hard line gets the most intense wave action, and there's no way anybody can duplicate that in an aquarium.
Yeah, well, and it's also like a water change every 20 seconds or whatever,
Well, they say the water's moving 40 meters a second or something. No. I can't remember what it is. I don't quote me on that.
Yeah.
It's the how fast the water actually moves per second. And think about trying to duplicate that in an aquarium. It's just not possible.
Yeah.
You blow out the glass.
Totally. Yeah, it's the thoroughness of the flow too, because the flow is just gets through every part of the reef.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because it's long, it's consistent. It's not like, we're trying to do it with power heads. I'm trying to come up with a wave action where it's like these paddles that go up and down. But then the wave energy gets so damn intense that it just flops out of the aquarium.
Yeah. Got to have Euro bracing for that. That's for sure.
Yeah. or real deep sides.
Yeah. So yeah, I've noticed as far as lighting, like I said, it could be my top par range is probably 500. So, pretty much any millie can take that 500 par, no problem.
They can also handle low par too.
Yeah. So have you noticed any look better under lower pars? Are there certain colors or characteristics that come out?
It all depends. This is one of the things that, in my wild coral systems I run, I think our coral cares are hitting the corals at like 270 to 300 par at most. But the difference between the wild systems and the farm systems are nutrients. So if you have a lower par level or a lower light level on your corals, then you want your high nutrients to be higher. And if you have a higher light level, you want your nutrients to be lower. If you don't have a balance between your nutrients and the amount of intensity that of light that's hitting the corals, you're going to end up either with browned out corals or bleached out corals.
It's interesting because I would think that higher par you would need more nutrients to kind of support the zooxanthellae, which kind of darkens the coral and potentially gives it more kind of protection from the high par.
That's the problem.
Okay.
If you have high nutrients, the zooxanthellae becomes more dense in the coral body, which turns it turn brown.
Okay.
So if you have really high nutrients and super high light, your corals are going to be brown. You might have a little bit of green, you might have a little bit of fluorescent tips, but from the growth. But for the most part, the reason why corals brown out in a lot of systems is because there's no balance between the nutrients and the actual light that they're getting. So when we moved into the farm over where we are now, it's been 11, almost 12 years. That was one of the things that I was, adamant on, was because I didn't want to run super intense lighting over the entire wild coral system. I wanted to have, relatively low light. But I also said I'm not running protein skimmers because I don't want to run protein skimmers on my wild system. So I keep a higher nutrient load in there.
Yeah.
So I have the intense lighting from the acros, which is the highest intensity, which is, like I said, 270 to 300 par. And then you go over to all the rest of the aquariums, and then we're looking at like maybe 150 max, and all the way down to like 30, depending on, and I have different areas for the corals to live.
We'll talk about all the different
works really well.
ranges. Yeah. So one of the things I was just thinking there is like I would think in a system with lower par and higher nutrients, the coral's going to be getting more of its nutritional needs met from the nutrients in the system that it's feeding on, versus higher par, it's getting more of its nutrients or more of its energy from the zooxanthellae. Is that kind of the idea? Or
corals get all of the majority of their nutrients come from the zooxanthellae.
Yeah.
All the time. Even though you feed your corals, that's a supplemental type of food, that you can use to get more nutrients. It's always good to feed your corals, but it's not necessary in an aquarium environment. Millies, for one example, they have long polyps. They're real furry. There's a lot of coral lights.
Good food capture.
Fragment.
Yeah.
And if you look at the way they grow, if you have a natural growing millie that's in a perfect table, it actually, the way they grow, funnels the current down to the center of the colony. So if you notice that, this is something that a lot of people will notice, if you get a wild or a maricultured millie, they might not polyp out nearly as much on the branch tips and the first, say inch and a half of the colony, but down interior, the polyps are wide open. Why is that? One of the reasons is because there's no fish picking at them like they would normally have in the wild. But two, when there is fish that are picking at them in the wild, they can't get in their branches. And because of the growth pattern, it funnels the food all down into the center of the coral so that the polyps in the center can feed it or can feed. But they can live without. being fed for sure.
Yeah. Talk about nutrients for millies, because I think that phosphates seem to really make a big difference with Millipora. Like if your phosphates are like almost undetectable or very low, your millies are going to lighten up and polyps will start to shrink and lose polyp extension.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. I mean, phosphates are important for all corals. I mean, without phosphates, you have no food for your zooxanthellae that's feeding the corals itself. So it's very important to have, minor amounts of phosphates in your system. I like to run all my farm systems are getting 0.03 phosphates if I can keep it there.
Yeah.
And up as high as like 12 to 20 in nitrates.
Yeah.
And it's been a good recipe.
Okay. That's lower phosphate than I would have thought if you're 0.03 at times. Like that's kind of the lowest I would be comfortable with.
0.03, I mean, there's, what is it, the Grow Out 1, which is like 2,500 gallons. I've got, a scrubber on there. I used to have major phosphate issues in all of my systems until I put the scrubbers on, but they really keep them in check, and I can adjust my phosphate level just by adjusting the light cycle on the scrubbers. And of course, the food that you feed is very key as well. If the food you have or that you're feeding, and when you feed like we do, I used to go to like 5 pounds of reef fluids every like 3 months.
Yeah.
And I was battling phosphates that you wouldn't believe in, nuisance algae, and reef fluids is a great food. I mean, I'm not knocking reef fluids.
Yeah, especially if you want to raise phosphates too. I mean, it's a great natural way to raise your phosphates.
I still use it.
Yeah.
If I get a zero reading the day we feed, because I test my phosphates and nitrates on 3 times a week, and on the days that we feed, if the phosphates are low, according to my IDIP, and not registering at all, then we add, instead of adding all of the Captivate, integrate reef, we add about a third in reef fluids. And then I can test the nutrients, the phosphates again not the next day, but the next day after that, and normally they're back up into the 0.05, 0.03 range. But that's been key. I mean, just keeping small amounts of nutrients, especially in the farm systems. On the people would laugh if they heard what my phosphates were in my. I'll tell you, my wild coral systems, they can be anywhere from 1 down to 0.7, 0.6. And then nitrates are as high as like 60.
Crazy.
But I've also got a good balance for light and for everything, and everything does extremely well. Yeah,
and a big buffer, like a lot of coral to kind of buffer what's going in and out. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Any particular trace elements you would kind of attribute to anything to do with Millipora? I mean, I think the different colors of Millipora might be, like a thing to look at too, because I mean they come in every color. So it's like if we're going to talk about what color is responsible for what, what trace is responsible for what color, it's hard to say.
Honestly, that's a rabbit hole that is not going to be solved very easily because it's going to be expensive to do the testing and everything that needs to be done. So my whole philosophy with minor and trace elements is make sure that they're present.
Yeah.
Before we started playing with minor and trace elements, 3.5 years ago, I never added minor and traces to the system. It was just straight up what the salt gave me, and we did a lot of water changes.
Yeah,
we did
shipping stuff out a lot. Yeah.
No, we do water changes from one system for ship outs. Like that one wild coral system that we have our main packing table on is where all of the corals are placed in the packing table. And everybody's like, oh, you can't do that. Yes, you can. We take corals from every other system. We take them straight from that system, throw them straight into the other system. It doesn't matter if the phosphates are 0 over here and nitrates are 5. They go into 60 and 1.
Yeah.
People don't realize that corals self-acclimate, and this acclimation process that people do on corals is a myth. It's a waste of time. It's more stressful on the corals than people even realize. I mean, when people realize how we do things in here, they just look at me like I'm nuts. And I'm like, no. It's just reality that, all this other stuff that's being spewed out by experts is
Yeah,
they don't have the experience.
I agree. I mean, my philosophy on bringing in stuff from overseas now is, I mean, I'll rinse the coral in my tank water just to kind of give it a swish and whatever came in that bag, but it'll just go right into quarantine. As long as the temperature is the same, I just don't even, unless your salinity is wildly out of range. Like that's the only, yeah. I mean, I guess if you think about potassium chloride dips, like what you're doing in a potassium chloride dip is like hyper salinity dip. Right, and the corals respond very well to that.
Yeah, they do. Everybody should get an experience of actually diving in the wild when the tides are changing in a lagoon where a river runs in. Mm-hmm. So you have a lagoon in Indonesia. There's a river running into it. The lagoon is 95 degrees, and the tide changes and low tides, high tides coming in, and that 90-degree water is there for another half an hour to an hour, and it's down to 75 or less in some areas of the reef. We have the reef crest. I'll give you a perfect example. When I was with Vincent over in Bali, we were diving one of his mariculture sites, and there's a reef crest, and the tide was low. And you could see the waves hitting the reef crest, and then they were just barely coming up. As the water was going across the reef crest, it was barely coming up and going into the deep part behind the crest, where he had a whole bunch of big monster goniophoras, and they were down like 25 feet of water. I was like, I got to go down there, but I'm snorkeling at the surface, where the acros are, and it's like 85, 90-degree water, and I dove straight down, and that water was like 70 at the bottom. Wild, It's acclimating for temperature, salinity, and all that. They don't need it. They don't need it.
Yeah, I think if the coral's healthy, it's designed to be able to handle these fluctuations, right? Is kind of what you're getting at.
And it's not healthy. Yeah. It's better to not acclimate it than it is to stick it straight in good, clean water. I mean, if you know your system is dialed in and you're good. I import a lot of corals. I used to do dipping on everything in the very beginning stages of my importing for the first maybe like 6 months. And we used to dip everything in iodine, and, I was losing corals all the time. And then one night we had something, an emergency popped up, and we just took the corals out of the bags and threw them right in the system, and I had like way less loss than I ever had. Yeah. I'm like, whoa, there's something to this. And that was actually, right about the time I started talking to Jake, and Jake's like, that's weird. He was all about acclimation in the beginning too. And then as we got to know each other, we both would say, don't acclimate your corals. It's the worst thing you can do. Just take it out of the water that it's in, stick it in your QT or in your vessel that you're going to use with your system water, and dip it, and you're good to go.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Okay, so back to millies and spaths here. So,
yes.
Fragging, I feel like they're pretty responsive too. I mean, they're very good coral for healing. I don't think
easy fraggers.
Nothing really to say about that, but
shipping's the problem with them.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't lost millies shipping much, but probably larger pieces, colonies. Yeah, definitely. I would say colonies coming from, where the travel time's 40 plus hours or something like that. Some of the millies are going to be some of the first ones to go.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. Yes. Yeah, but so what would you say difficulty level? I would say I would give them like a 4 or a 5.
I was going to say 4 or 5 too.
Yeah.
They're really not that hard, especially because they can handle lower light and still do extremely well. I would say 4 or 5.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. It's fun. We're like 3 corals into this list, and it's like we're like 40 minutes in. So this is actually one of my favorite species is Aquapora latistella. The Candyland kind of. What are some of the common names? There's the Candyland, Bali shortcake. It was called.
Is that latistella? I thought Bali shortcake was supposedly microclonus.
I've seen them change the classification on it, but we know the latistella. So I mean, often they're like the nice pink colors with like multicolored tips and whatnot. Yes. What else would you say characteristic wise? I have seen other latistella come in. Like where the scientific name on the CITES said it was latistella, and I was like, this is definitely a different species. So I don't know. But
getting down to species level is just for them to be happy with their paperwork that they get at Fish and Wildlife, and to be able to give an exact identification of these corals is almost impossible. Especially now that there's going to be over 1,200 species of Acropora coming out when it's all said and done, and they're done with their new taxonomy. It's going to be insane. There's 1,200 corals.
That's crazy. Yeah. So, are you an Elatostella fan? Do you grow a lot of them? Do you farm them?
I've never been a huge Elatostella fan. I like them. I mean, I like all corals. That's one of the ones that I question. Mm-hmm. Like you were saying, I question whether or not they really are Elatostellas.
Yeah.
I don't know, because most of what we see is mariculture colonies, and we don't get to see them grow into a robust colony before they get broken up into pieces. Yeah. And it's like the biggest issue for me is somebody sends me a picture of a frag. What is this? I don't know. It's a frag.
Yeah, you got to see it grow out. Yeah, because I wondered if like the Reef USA Firecracker or the Maxima Proximo, those are a couple that they look to me like Elatostella, but they have like a neon yellow-green polyp. So they might be a different species. And this was a coral that I found can't take way too much light. I would put it in my system into like a 250 to 350 kind of range. I wouldn't give it that, 700-800 metal halide. But I don't know. What's your experience?
Again, it's sink or swim.
Yeah.
I don't believe in light acclimation because these corals are coming from the wild, and we can't duplicate that anyhow. Yeah. But from a hobbyist or a farmer to a hobbyist, light acclimation still isn't necessarily going to be an issue. It's to make you feel better.
Yeah.
That you're doing something when you spend, a couple of $100s on a frag that, or whatever the price of these things are. I mean, you just mentioned names of some of these common names, and I have no idea what you're I have no idea what any of those names are.
Yeah.
But I'm sorry, I don't mean to keep shooting down the whole light. I've not really experienced major issues taking a fragment and sticking it on the farm and right next to something that's been thriving and growing.
Yeah.
Do they lighten up a little bit? Yes.
Yeah.
But they usually recover quite quickly.
Yeah, it's very rare that something, unless it's like a really known sort of deeper water sensitive species like Acropora awi or some of those like Indo speciosa, like some of those ones I think you got to be really careful with light. But people that buy corals from me, they want, they'll sometimes say, oh, how should I light acclimate them? I'll put them on a rack low down. And it's like, dude, like your lights are probably not going to be stronger than mine anyways. So just put them where you want them,
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's find a spot that your coral looks happy.
Yeah.
And if it's not happy when you put it there, within a day, it's not going to get happy there. Move it. Mm-hmm. That's what I usually tell people.
Totally.
Well, I really wanted it there. Well, you can't dictate where this animal's going to be happy.
Yeah. It'll tell you. And hopefully it tells you slowly as opposed to all of a sudden, because that's never good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, you're exactly right.
So I would say for this species, my experience is it likes some nutrients. It likes the kind of, 0.05 to 0.1 phosphate, a good nitrate ratio, that kind of typical standard thing. Difficulty level, I would probably put them at like a 6 or something like that.
I can't really give it a difficulty level because I'm not 100% sure if I even have them on the farm.
Yeah, well, we can check in on it after. See if you can send me a pic of something. Be like, is that? Okay. Let's move on to the next one then. So Microclodos we could probably talk about for a while, and I think there's a pretty big distinction between the Indo and the Aussie version, which they've got to be a different species. But do you want to just start with talking about the Aussie version, the strawberry shortcakes of the world?
Oh, there's so many different color morphs of that. I've got some that were called shortcakes, and I have, from the same shipment, both strawberry shortcakes, both Microclodos, but colors don't match.
Yeah.
It's just different genotypes. But there's so many different genotypes of Microclodos. I've seen them coming from Australia where they're yellow and red. Or mainly what you get is because they go collected in the green and red, cream with red correlates. They're actually finicky too, especially wild pieces. I've had my fair share of issues with wild ones. I actually just got, Keith from Reef Bump sent me the hyperberry and the OG shortcake that was initially named, I don't know, UCA that did their...
Yeah, it was Unique Corals that I think named the strawberry shortcake. Yeah, Joe.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
But, and those two corals are supposedly the same, but they're completely different when they grow out. The colors of, especially the hyperberry, I like it better than the OG because it's got this deep, dark interior of green, and it lightens up and gets really bright red, and it's got a little bit of yellow in it, like between the red and the green.
Yeah.
It's really, really cool looking coral, and that's called the hyperberry.
Nice.
And the shortcake's just green and red.
Yeah, I've seen that extra color come out for sure. I think I put in this list, Cytherea is another one that's maybe in a similar category to me as Microclados as far as like care requirements. Or would you?
No, I would say Cytherea. We have one that we just actually released not long ago called the Martian Sunrise, and it's difficult when you're growing it in captivity. I remember the coral when it came in. I remember that it was a Cytherea, but I have it sitting right next to, say, a small immature colony of, say, Hyacinthus. And when you look at them right next to each other, being small immature colonies, not big, nice, robust colonies, you can see that they're almost the same. But then I can go look at the same exact coral, like the Gold Rush Hyacinthus, that we have monster colonies of, and I know that that the Hyacinthus came from one of those colonies. They just have a completely different growth pattern.
Yeah,
the Cytherea is really tight.
Yeah, it's tight, and I think that like some of the Indo versions are those kind of yellow. There's a lot of yellows in Cytherea that come out, and I've seen some nice ones from Australia too. But that's a species I feel like the Australia version and the Indo version do have similar enough characteristics to be like maybe.
They're all different.
Yeah. All right.
They are. Okay. We're going to get to another species here, and I'll go into what I was about to say, but I don't want to ruin that until we get to the.
Yeah, we're going to get to Hyacinthus because that's a fun one. But Microclados. I've noticed that some of these Aussie Microclados types, and I would say that like the Vivid Confetti is kind of in that similar species range. Same with Pink Lemonade, the Tyree Pink Lemonade. Those are kind of a species that I find they thrive, survive, or dive in the same ways. You know what I mean? That's like they sort of like if one of those is doing good, the rest of them are probably doing good too. So, yeah, the lemonade's been in the hobby. That's an interesting one because Pink Lemonade's been in the hobby for, I don't know, 15, 20 years, like a long time. At
least 20 years. I remember Pink Lemonade being around back way before ACI started. ACI will be 18 in May. And that coral, I have to say, was probably around since before 2000. Probably in the late 90s is when that one was, when Tyree put the name on that one.
Crazy. The interesting thing is I have not seen that coral come in, like that same morph of that coral come in like any supplier's, imports. Nope. So,
I think it came from Fiji.
Interesting.
I think it came from Fiji.
So it'll be interesting to see if we see it again now that Fiji's back up.
I will. I mean, maybe others will see it, but that's something I'm not even gonna touch with 10-foot pole.
Yeah.
I love Fiji, I do, but it's just for me getting it on my side of the country. It's hit and miss, and I don't like taking risks with animals' lives.
Yeah, and I don't, not to talk down the Fiji too much, but I did just kind of a tester order of some macros, and it's kind of like a lot of the same stuff, and like unless there's some way to kind of pick and be a little more choosy about what you're going to get, it's you kind of just get stuck with what you get. So yeah. I
mean, I got some, and the acros did fairly well, but there's a lot of, this is the problem with the hobby nowadays, because everybody wants to run their blue lights. They don't enjoy a beautiful blue coral, and I got a lot of really beautiful blues, and I'm taking pictures of them, and they're freaking blue as blue can be, and nobody wants them because I'm taking them under white light, because if I take the picture under blue light, it looks gray.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, what happened to acros being under white light? The blue light is not what they need. And when you break it all down, deep waters, so-called deep waters, a lot of the stuff we call deep water is not even deep water. It's like, Caroliniana is somewhat deep, 60 feet. But, Sonoy, that's by far my all-time favorite. We'll get into that later, but deep water, we'll get into that later.
Yeah, that's on the list. That's on the list.
I won't jump ahead.
But I mean, I would say a lot of these corals, when you're in the wild too, there's certain depths where it's quite blue. So, I think that white spectrum is like super important. Obviously, it's like going to be one of the main things responsible for the photosynthesis happening. But this blue spectrum obviously has an impact on the color and certain aspects of the health.
Does it?
I believe so. I mean, Jason Fox's whole thing is kind of like blue, 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 and it seems to work for him.
250 watt radiums.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then that's a full spectrum.
Over his home wreckers.
Yeah.
Especially over his home wreckers.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's different to say blue, like a blue radion versus radium versus like blue from a
LED blue.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. I mean, when you go with like a 20K blue, like a halide blue, that still has a decent spike in, your red spectrums, where if you're running royal blue LEDs, there's no red whatsoever. It's just blue light. And that's why I always say LEDs are superficial light, because it's not reality of what corals actually receive in the wild. They adapt very well to it. We all know that. But then I have a problem if I see somebody post something that I know and it's a frag and I'm like, I need to have that, I want to put one on the farm. If they're growing it under straight blue and they don't have any white spectrum whatsoever in it on their LEDs, they don't ever grow for me. I've got, I don't even know, it's probably 20 frags that have been growing for over a year and they're not growing. They're still the same. But then if I get a fragments from, say, Sanjay, and I do a lot of reef code trading, his corals grow like weeds in my tank because he runs his radions at 100% on all channels all the time. Yeah, and it's giving you closer to a full spectrum, but it's not a full spectrum still. And put them in my system, they don't grow really good for the first 3 months. But if it's all blue growth for where I get the fragment from, it's at least a year and a half or more before I even get a puddle of growth, because they don't adapt back to. Yeah, that's a good point. And I think as a seller of coral, selling stuff that's been grown under a full spectrum light is a much more user-friendly way to sell corals. And it's and if it's a good thing to consider for sure. I mean, that being said, like we were saying, not as many people run halides, so it's a little different. But I do think that corals that have come from a system with halides tend to adapt well to LEDs and whatever other light. Exactly. Yeah. Totally. It's like I said, they adapt well going down in quality, but they won't going back up in quality. Yeah. That's but it doesn't mean it's not going to be okay. Yeah. Totally. Yeah, so microclados, I don't find them to be a particularly hard species, but they can be prone to these dark kind of pigment. I wouldn't say it's like an infection, but I've seen them turn brown for no reason before, and that brown kind of spreads from the base up. You know what the brown is? It's that the coral itself doesn't have enough nutrients. When a coral turns brown, an acropora turns brown, it's because the amount of light that they're getting is not what they need, or there's an imbalance in your nutrient level. Mm-hmm. So if you have high light, low nutrients, and you have a lot of other corals in your tank that are doing extremely well, but then you have this particular species that just stays brown, that coral's not getting the light that it needs for the nutrients that you have in the system. And it's producing more, allowing more zooxanthellae to populate its tissue. Yeah. So that it can get the nutrients that it needs from the zooxanthellae. So that's like one of the big things that I stopped commenting on anybody having, on the threads and forums and social media. I just stopped because it's just, I can't. Whatever, you're too busy for that anyways. I want to help though. Yeah. But there's people that are beyond help. They know more than somebody that has 18 years of farming experience and 30 years experience in the hobby. They've been doing it for 6 months. They know more than me. And I'm done arguing with people over something as simple as light and nutrient balance. Yeah.
Well, I think
it really is that simple.
What would be helpful to people would be to kind of figure out a bit of a ratio of, because we have this ratio of nutrients we talk about, but ratio of nutrients to par levels and lighting levels, because if there was kind of a chart that crossed over where nutrients and light kind of found that balance, that could be good data to have people consider.
I give you a perfect, example of how every system's different. There's too many variables to give somebody that data because it's not going to necessarily work. If it worked for, say, me and all the stuff that I'm doing to my system with all the minor traces, keeping my pH stabilized at 8.3, most people aren't doing that. Most people are not keeping their pH stabilized, and what people don't realize that they're doing to the corals, they're making them weaker in growth, and they're not as healthy. Mm-hmm. pH is so important. I mean, if it wasn't important, then why is the biggest existential threat to the ocean or the planet ocean acidification? Absolutely. I mean, I just can't wrap my head around why we chase alkalinity when scientists say we need to get the pH up of the ocean. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me. We're in a box. We should be keeping our pH stabilized, not our alkalinity. And alkalinity fluctuations aren't as big of a deal if you have a stable pH. I agree. And if you have a stable alkalinity, your pH is still fluctuating all the time. Your corals will live. I mean, we all know that, but they will not thrive like they should for stability of all parameters, and that's a big, that's another rabbit hole. I won't go down it now. But it's like, okay. So my point with that is if you have highlights and your nutrients are on the lower side, like 0.03, 10 in nitrates, and your light is super intense like mine is, and then you have the acros are doing amazing, and then somebody that has a lower light system and they have a higher nutrient level, and the same exact acro that is in your system or my system that's growing in that lower light system looks exactly the same, a little bit darker maybe because the nutrients in the lower light. Mm-hmm. You can basically figure out where you need to go from what are the nutrients over here and the par level, and what are the nutrients here and the par level, and everywhere in between. It's just going to be a matter of figuring it out, calculating it out. I mean, there's no real recipe for it because, like I said, every single system's different, and your flow has a huge play in all of the coloration and all the growth and everything of your corals as well. Yeah. So that's a key thing that everybody needs to understand. I had a guy I was helping out. He had milka stylo, and he showed me pictures of his milka stylo. I'm like, your milka's not happy. What do you mean? It looks amazing. I'm like, no, dude, your milka is not happy. And then I go out and take a quick snapshot of my milka, and the polyps are this long on it. Yeah. He's like, what are you doing to it? And I'm like, well, you're working on the kalkwasser method that I do, which is great, but that's not the only thing you need to work on. I said, it's just sitting there in the water. It wiggles a little, the polyps wiggle a little bit here and there, but the reason why they're not extending is because they're not getting that flow that they need. That full exchange. Yeah, because the flow is pulling stuff off of the coral and bringing it to the coral. It's that constant flushing and cycle. Yeah, totally. I mean, he got dialed in with the pH side of it at 8.26 was his value, which he can't go any higher unless he uses another hydroxide, which I won't teach him how to use. I'm like, just be happy. It peaks out at like 8.35. You're good to go. Now move your flow pattern around until you see the polyps really extending on that thing. And all he did was move the power head like 3/4 of an inch, just twisted it a little bit. And I could see that the polyps were moving a little bit more. The next day he shows me a picture and the polyps are extended like, half inch. Like, makes such a world of difference, just changing flow a little bit. Yeah, totally. Okay, so the microclados, I'm going to put the difficulty level like around a 5. I think they're fairly easy. Yeah. Yes. And Cytherea, I mean, I'm going to say similar. 8. You think higher? They can be really finicky. Yeah, but especially from a frag to a colony is one thing. I mean, as a frag, they're going to be easy. Most of these acros are going to be fairly simple as a frag, because there's the water pattern that's moving is how they're going to grow. Yeah, it's when water flow changes, especially with a Cytherea and a tenuis, because of how tight they can grow and how dense the corals are. The more corals you have per inch, the more water flow you need. that's a given because there's that many more animals per inch of a branch. And if you don't have the intense water flow going through them, that's when you start having the problems.
Yeah.
Especially, it's always in the center of the colony, down the base.
I can even say I just had a little mistake a few days ago. I was servicing a couple of my gyres and didn't turn the controller back on, and they sat overnight not running, and RTN on a colony right by where that gyre was, the next, like a day or two
it can
later.
happen that fast.
Yeah, and these were colonies that are really close together, really tight, so you can kind of see how that just direct effect of this little mistake it's just set me off.
Hey,
yeah,
we all do it, man.
Yeah.
I forgot to turn my power. I was back looking at my corals last night before I left, and I shut all the flow off. I didn't turn one of the sets of gyres back on,
mm-hmm.
and I got in here and I'm like, what the hell? Why does this look weird? I wanted to kick myself in the ass because I know that is detrimental to especially the larger colonies that were right in that general vicinity of those power heads. But I didn't have any issues that I saw, but it usually happens for me a day or two later. Yeah,
totally. It is usually a day or two. Yeah, because it's this chain reaction that starts and goes from there. Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the next one. So I've put these in the same category too because I think they're similar care-wise. Nasuda and Divaricata, if I'm saying those correctly.
Divaricata, yes, you're saying them correctly.
Yeah.
Divaricata is like pink Cadillac.
Yeah, pink Cadillac. There you
ACI
go. You know a name of a coral.
I only know it because I farm it.
Yeah,
I
totally.
have pink Cadillac on the farm, and I have another one that's people always said that it was the same as the pink Cadillac, and I'm like, man, pink Cadillac's got blue purple polyps on it. I'm like, my ACI Light Bright has red polyps on it, and it gets blue in the tips, and
Nice.
it's still the Barcata. Nasuda is such a freaking amazing coral. I love it. It's one of my favorite species of Acropora, because the wild colonies that you get have branches that are thick as your index finger or your middle finger, with these beautiful upside down pig nose like coral lights sticking up on.
Yeah, is that why they're called Nasuda? I always thought it was like nose Suda because it's like a bit of a nose shaped corallite.
Yeah, it very well could be. Who
Yeah.
knows?
Yeah.
Usually the corals are named after the scientist or the person that found it.
Yeah.
And it's probably somebody in Italy that's named Nasuda or something. Or
Yeah, maybe. Who knows? Yeah. But like I have this lime Nasuda with purple polyps that I've been growing for, I don't know, 10 plus years. It's just a really easy, nice, good starter coral.
I have what we call the purple polyp Nasuda.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so I guess nothing particularly, like I would say lighting wise, like they can look pretty good under pretty low par. And they can also handle high par, but it's kind of one of those corals where like you might as well not use the best spot in the tank for it because it's probably going to look pretty good in lower lighting anyways.
They grow fast too.
Yeah, they do.
That's the other thing. They grow so different. Like I remember what all of them looked like when I put them on the farm. I've got 4 or 5 different color morphs on Nasuda.
Mm-hmm.
They just don't grow the same. They're thin, super thin branches compared to what you got from the wild. But again, where they're collected and the wave action they're getting causes them to grow differently in captivity.
Yeah.
But fairly easy coral to keep. I mean, heck, I have one we call the dark matter, which is basically, it's almost black.
Interesting.
And it's got these deep purple polyps on it. And I was like, what am I going to do with this thing? It didn't look like that when it came in. And as we've been growing it out, somebody goes, it looks like dark matter.
That's a cool name.
This name, dark matter, on it.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, it was one of the most popular acros we were selling for a long ass time. And I'm like, why is everybody buying this freaking ugly black dark coral? And I thought we lost it all over, Hurricane Ian. And it turns out that I'm looking back there like 3 weeks ago. I'm like, that's dark matter.
you had it sticking around somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah,
Nice.
it came back.
Yeah, they're pretty easy. I mean, I would say difficulty level, I'd put them at like, the 3. Nasuda and Divaricata probably, 3.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, even a 2. I mean, I would say if someone wants to just like try an acro out, that's their first Acropora, just put a pink Cadillac in there. And, it's a good testament to like, if you can pull the nice color out of it, that's a pretty good indication that you're moving in the right direction. Yeah, for sure. Anything else about them? I think they can handle a pretty wide range of nutrients. I've even had a colony in a pretty crappy spot as far as flow, and I'd never lost it. Like I've never lost those corals almost ever.
They just grow thinner.
Yeah, they're just like maybe not as happy, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So hard to kill for sure.
Never really had tons of polyp extension on mine. I mean, well, I guess the polyp extension was what the polyp extension was, but the polyps aren't that big. I don't know if they have that same thing where the polyps are fairly small, and they're basically about as big as the opening of a coral light. They don't like hang out like a millie or a tenuis or subglabra, which has that one long tentacle.
Yeah.
I love that part of them.
Yeah. And something I would say, actually, they're a good canary coral for telling you if you have acro bugs. I find they're one of the first ones to start losing polyp extension if you've got any kind of acro bug, red bugs, gray bugs, whatever. So they're a good canary coral for that. Yeah. Okay, cool. Sure. Moving on to hyacinthus. I put a few others in this line because I feel like maybe they're similar care-wise. So mirabilis, what is it? Anthocerasis?
And Cytherus.
And Cytherus, yeah, and Clathrata. I think these are kind of like, fairly, I mean, you could probably agree that most acros table when they get big enough, but these are corals that want to table even from a small size. They just really want to be a table. Yeah. So hyacinthus would probably be one of the most like widely spread ones. I feel like it gets mixed up with Millipora to kind of newer hobbyists because it has a bit of a similar look to it, but
I can see that.
Yeah.
This is where I wanted to go down a rabbit hole with you on hyacinthus.
Yeah.
This was the funniest thing when I was talking to Russell Kelly over in Australia. He's been doing a lot of the reclassifications, and that's where actually Vincent got all of his data that he sent to me with all these reclassifications. And I looked at the data and I threw it in the air. I'm like, I feel dumb. It was
square one, back to square one.
Yeah, back to square one. And even Vincent was like, I got to relearn all my acros again. He's like, he's like, I thought I was good. And I'm like, you know what? You'll get it down quicker than I will because you dive every day. But anyways, hyacinthus on the Great Barrier Reef. It's a big ass reef. It's 1,000 miles long. The corals that they were considered hyacinthus on the northern part of the Barrier Reef, and even just a few clicks south of that, and then a few clicks farther south from that, and a few clicks farther south from that, all the way down to the edge of the Barrier Reef, none of them are the same. None of them are hyacinthus. Well, one of them is. Mm-hmm. But every other one that we would call hyacinthus is actually another species. And that's the confusing part for me, because I can't tell the difference between this hyacinthus and this hyacinthus. Even though I know that my divers in Australia are collecting from, Cairns all the way out into the Swains, and hyacinthus come from most reefs. I mean, they're very common.
Prolific species. Yeah.
Exactly. So what we know as hyacinthus is going to be broken down. I think they were saying like 6 or 7 species. Okay, cool. And Cytherus is another one that is going to be broken down into more species. There's a lot of them that's happening too, but even say as far as like Okinawa, Japan, there's tons of tabling acros that are growing on those reefs up there. A lot of it's because of the upwellings that come in from deep that are around Japan. But they're not even considered hyacinthus from what I heard. But again, don't hold me to that. But I know that a lot of the studies that are being done right now are mainly on, in Australia. They're getting out into the Indonesian and up into all the way over to Africa. There's a lot of acropores growing everywhere, but a lot of that stuff. That's why there's going to be so many species because it's just a wide range of areas where these things were thought to be the same or completely different. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, and something I kind of noted is I've got some really nice like old school Fiji corals that are hyacinthus, and to me they're nothing like the Indonesian hyacinthus. They're definitely a different species. Definitely. Yeah, but again, they're coral that they table. They really want to be a flat table, and I think that's a good. If it's not growing that way as it starts to mature into a colony, then you don't have proper flow because it should look like a table. And if it's doing weird, funky stuff, you probably got to change up your flow because it should be very thorough and pass nicely under and through and all around the coral. So I would say they're probably one of the most loving corals in high flow. Yes. Yeah. They're also one of the most unforgiving corals in shipping. Yeah. Yeah. It's again, animal count per inch. So each polyp, and a lot of people don't realize this, and I don't think I touched base with this, but every single polyp is an individual animal.
Yeah.
So if you have, all those corallites are all those little individual clones of the original, larva that settled. And Hyacinthus probably has the most per inch of any other coral, or all the aquapores that are considered in the Hyacinthus safe family. There's so many animals per inch that shipping them is very difficult.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Yeah.
And that's why millies are hard. That's why tenuous can be hard for shipping sometimes, because they're fairly dense as well, but they're not nearly as dense as say millie and Hyacinthus are. Yeah. Even Cythera and Cythrus and Clethrata, they're all very tough shippers because they need a lot of flow. But what I was getting ready to say when you were talking about Hyacinthus, Fiji Hyacinthus, I used to love getting the little perfect round.
Oh, they're beautiful. Those little tight little, yeah.
And they have the polyp structure going the whole way around the base, but they never got a chance to table out yet before they were collected. And then sometimes you get the ones that have the baby table on the top of it, but then on the underside is all that branching corallite sticking out in a uniform structure type. It's really a cool ass coral.
Yeah, they're one of those corals that if I ever got one as a DOA, it would be immediately like a gift for someone. I'd bleach it and give it to a friend or something, because it's like, this is a beautiful little piece of coral.
It is, 100%.
Yeah, totally.
100%.
I love them. It's cool to see Fiji open back up. That's probably one of the species, that they call Hyacinthus, that I'm probably the most excited to see more morphs coming back into the hobby.
The Ripies is the one I'm happy to see.
Oh, yeah.
That's
cool.
We'll
get to those. Let's hold on that.
Yes.
But I put in the same category here the Anthocereus or whatever. Is that?
Yes.
Yeah, Anthocereus.
I think I'm pronouncing it right.
Yeah, I'm reading it off the thing here. So, but I believe that ORA Red Planet is Anthocereus. Some people have debated that it was Hyacinthus, but based on sort of looking at some of the corals of the world photos and stuff like that, I think it's the Anthocereus.
It's grown in captivity again, and
it's been around for so long too, right?
Yeah. I always thought it was a Hyacinthus, but again, I try not to break everything down into species unless I'm 100% positive, and most of the tailing acros are so difficult to actually give you, and unless I know what it was the day it came into my facility and I took that fragment off, stuck it on a tile, and grew it out. And I say, okay, I know that's a Hyacinthus. I know this is Cythera. I know this is, that's the only way I like to put species name.
Yeah.
It's so difficult.
We do the best we can. Plus,
everybody has to argue with you about it.
Yeah. So we talked about flow for this kind of category. Characteristics being kind of flat tabling. Lighting, I feel like they can handle a lot of light. You can just guess from their corallite structure and growth structure that they're a shallow water coral. So, the tighter the coral, probably the closer to the shore you can assume that it grows, right?
Yeah, that's definitely very characteristic of the Hyacinthus and Anthocereus, and Cythrus, Anthocereus and Clethrata. Very, very tight corallite growth, just like millie has tight corallite growth. But these are definitely tighter, is what I think you're getting.
Yeah. There was one that I mentioned in this category too, the Mirabilis, which somebody was saying is probably the TSA Bill Murray, which is a pretty widely known coral. Do you know that coral?
I know it. Yeah, I have it. Honestly, I can't tell the difference between something that I grew out that I know was a Hyacinthus and that coral.
Yeah.
They're sitting right next to each other. I can break a fragment off and look at them from the underside and from the top, and I can't say that they're different species.
Yeah. I always thought it looked like a Fiji Hyacinthus, but I don't know, original country of origin. So, because that's a coral that's been around for a long time. Maybe. I'm
looking at your list.
Yeah. Okay, good. I'll ask Kevin if he remembers where it came from. I'm going to have him on the podcast at some point.
Came from me.
Yeah. Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. A lot of people don't know this, but a lot of the TSA lineage named corals. They've been a customer of mine since they opened up their doors. But a lot of that stuff has come from us. at ACI.
If I ask him region, he'll just say Chris Meckley. He'll say ACI. That's not very helpful.
he likes he really likes my Aussie supplier. When he sends in acros, he likes to come over and pick out acros from the Aussie supplier. So a lot of his lineage stuff is from Australia, especially if it's not a tenuous or a millipora. Even the millies. A lot of it is. I can't say it all is, but there's a lot of stuff that has come from us.
Yeah. Okay. That's cool. So I would say difficulty level on these category of species would be around like a 5. I wouldn't say they're particularly difficult.
I said this.
Yeah.
I think it's probably one of the most difficult. Most people, especially as a beginner SPSer, if you don't understand water flow and light and nutrients.
Yeah, I guess maybe I'm just going based on the fact that I have a lot of light, a lot of flow, and in my systems, it's not a coral I lose, like it's not one that'll just have a random, loss. But maybe as a beginner, yeah.
As a beginner, it's something I would put it up. I'd put up in the 8 range.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So we're varied on that, but yeah, I have one called 4 Seasons that's on my site, and it's just a beautiful, super easy coral to grow. So I would sell that as one of my beginner acros. But it's also a coral that's been in the hobby for so long that it's so tank hardened too, Yeah. So yeah, those are things
that makes a big difference.
Yeah.
It makes a huge difference. Something if somebody, especially if a beginner's getting a wild fragment, good luck.
Yeah.
If you don't know what you're doing with acros and you're just trying them out, That's why I always say stick to a green slimer or a purple slimer or a staghorn, because staghorns are simple compared to a lot of these bushy growth type and tapering type acros.
Yeah, we got a nice little selection of stags to go over soon too. So here this is a weed coral. I'll put this as like a 2 on the easy scale. Natalensis, or the rainbow loom species.
Natalensis.
Yeah, Natalensis, I'm sure.
I do.
Yeah.
I do. It is not very common.
It didn't used to be, and then they figured out to farm it, and then it was in the farms all the time, and then it grew so well in the hobby that everybody was like, stop bringing it in. This grows too fast in the hobby.
Exactly. It is a very easy acro to keep. I actually don't think I keep any.
Yeah, just don't bother with it anymore.
No.
Yeah.
No.
I noticed something. I have a system in a local fish store, and every time I brought my rainbow looms down there, they about 2 days later would have peeled. And that tank was doing great. It just, for whatever reason, that coral was telling me something, and I ended up doing an ICP on the system, and the potassium was like 330 or something. So I brought the potassium up to the 400-ish range and started bringing rainbow looms back, and they were great. So it was like a direct indicator that coral really needs potassium. I mean, I think potassium, and we can agree, is one of the most important
it's a macro.
Elements. It's not a minor trace. It's a macro.
It's a macro.
Element.
I mean, it comes in like 399 is the average world ocean for potassium levels. I keep mine a little bit higher than that because I like the shimmer and the shine from all the corals when the potassium levels around 420 to 450.
Yeah.
And actually, it's funny because I have a region. I tested some Papua New Guinea water when I got some stuff from Papua back when the station was open. It's closed down right now, but I wanted to know what the potassium levels were, and I wanted to know manganese and a lot of the minor traces because it's pretty much a big ass volcanic island.
Interesting. Yeah, totally.
Potassium was like 460.
Yeah. Interesting.
From the reef where the humus were coming from that I was getting. So I'm like, this is interesting. But I've gotten samples of water from around the world. Potassium levels can be anywhere from like 380 all the way up to, 460 was the highest that I had seen.
Interesting.
But, yeah.
Do you remember that talk from that guy, Justin Credible, years back, where he had talked about this sort of accidental farming thing that happened with one of the guys he worked with, where the potassium got gradually raised over time to like 800 or something, and the corals looked awesome, but it was done very, very slowly. Do you remember hearing about that? I mean, I would never really
I don't
try
remember
to.
that. I mean, I know Justin well, but I don't remember that.
Yeah, he did a speech on at MACNA one year or something like that. This is maybe 5 or 6 years ago, but actually, I should have him on because he's a very curious individual. He seems like a fun guy. Yeah, but there was some ideas of raising potassium very slowly, but elevating it way beyond natural seawater, which I don't know. I feel like you're riding a bit of a line there. It might be fine, but I don't know. Like, it's not meant to be that way, No,
it's not. Well, is it Christian Henry over at Sustainable Reefs in Australia? He farms, and he was playing with potassium levels as high as like 550. Mm-hmm. And he had this Echinata awi that was red. And I'm going, dude, the thing's not going to stay red when you ship it around the world. Nobody keeps the potassium at 550. The reason why that coral is red is because of your potassium levels. I can guarantee you that. And he started setting it up throughout Australia, and it was all turning back to blue.
Yeah.
And it was potassium will make your reds go crazy. Reds, the pinks, and blue. But for some reason, the Echinata, that wasn't normally a blue coral.
That's wild. That's changing an entire primary color.
Yeah,
that's wild.
I know, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know if he still plays with potassium levels that high or not. Now, I've been playing with potassium levels for years because of the 1-hydroxide that I use, potassium hydroxide, in very, very tiny, minute amounts. And believe it or not, the amount of potassium that you get out of the small amount that gets dosed in my systems will raise the potassium level up, and I keep it in check with zeolite. But I've had potassium levels as high as like 520, 540.
Yeah. Okay.
And I see that's part of the reason why I do ICP testing on a weekly basis, because I want to see where my trends are with playing around with different means of removing potassium.
Yeah.
Because I like what I get for results. With
and I think like we were saying, raising potassium is pretty safe for the system if it's done slowly. Like, I think slowly, like 10 ppm a week, or maybe 20 ppm a week might be okay.
Corals can adapt very well to it. Fish-wise, that's where when you get the potassium, I had a guy who had potassium levels as high as, I think, like 600.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why is your potassium so high? And he was like, I was playing with potassium hydroxide. I'm like, I told you not to do that.
Oh, geez. Yeah, that's not to be taken lightly.
Rabbit hole. Yeah, I mean, it's all this fish time.
Yeah. Jeez, crazy.
Couldn't handle the potassium level that high.
Yeah.
I mean, we all know that potassium chloride dipping is a new common thing that works extremely well for a lot of different parasites and pests.
Yeah.
I haven't incorporated it myself yet, but obviously it's working. It's a
good way to go for sure. So we're talking about Natalensis, and won't spend too much time on this one, but it's an easy coral. I'm going to say it's a 2 for care level, as long as your potassium's up.
Yeah, I'd say you're good. That's the thing, though, is every salt out there's got different potassium levels with it. And as long as you're in natural seawater-ish area, 399 is what, 400, you're good to go.
Yeah, totally. Okay, next one is Rosaria, which the Australian Rosaria is one of my favorite corals, that kind of cherry blossom Rosaria. Yeah. They're beautiful. And I think the Rosaria that I've seen classified in Indo are definitely a different species.
I don't think they're the same. Too thin.
Yeah.
I've got we have Nick's cherry blossom, and actually just released that on my Frag to orders like 5 weeks ago. And it is just fire red with orange and yellow in the base. And it is a tabling acro of all things. People don't realize it's a tabling acro.
Yeah.
Mine's only like this big, and it just, but it's also getting really intense flow hitting it too. So I imagine that's probably part of the reason why it's tabling out, but it's a fairly easy coral from my experience.
I would call it the most truly purely red acro I've ever seen. It's the most red.
Yes.
Yes. You just can't get any more red.
There's different color morphs of it too, and that's what I like about it.
Totally.
I've got, Nick from Ultra Corals over in Australia. He coined the name Cherry Blossom, and then he starts sending me all these colonies that are all so different. He's like, Cherry Blossom, Cherry Blossom, Cherry Blossom. I'm like, Nick, They're different.
Yeah.
You can't call one a cherry blossom and then this one here that's got green in it a cherry blossom. Like, which one's the cherry blossom? The one that's red, orange, and yellow, or the one that's red and green?
Yeah.
And he's like, it's all cherry blossom. He says, oh, I'm like, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And it can get like a blue tip. It can get, like you say, the green in the base. It can get these metallic kind of yellow colors throughout some of the inner branches of it too. It's an awesome coral for sure. One thing I would say as a care related tip, it does not respond well to certain dips. If you dip it in like Revive, Coral RX, the tissue will just go like nothing. But potassium chloride's fine. If
you use the recommended time of dipping for those particular products. I mean, I use a lot of Julian's Revive. I also use another dip that's very similar to Julian's. It's all a bunch of different oils, like Julian's is. And I just do 9 minutes versus, I think the 15 minutes that's recommended.
Yeah, that's insane. I've never done it that long.
Yeah, I do 9 minutes on the dip with Julian's or this other dip that I'm using, and I have no ill effects. Now, if I'm doing certain Monty species, especially Polyonensis and Saboensis, they're freaking nightmares to get dipped properly. And we'll talk about that when we get into Monties. Yeah. But I still, my go-to dip for every coral, and I still don't understand why it's not the most commonly used dip, is iodine. Iodine is, it's the best dip that you can use because it's like an anesthetic at the same time as true. Kind of, all this other stuff is just expensive oils that don't do anything different than what iodine does, and it doesn't sterilize the area if there's a cut or a nick or whatever. Like if I'm dipping a coral, normally I dip the coral and then I clean the coral and then it goes back. It goes into iodine right afterwards if I'm using it. Iodine for me on a 7-8 gallon dipping container is too expensive, so that's why I use them. But then when I clean the corals, then I go into an iodine bath in a small container, and I just reuse it over and over for the corals that need to have that done. But that's iodine for a hobbyist is by far the best dip that they can use.
So are you just using like pharmacy type iodine? Like, is it just like medical grade?
I just get it from Chris.
Yeah. Okay. I'm curious the mixing portions. Is it what's your water to mils ratio?
That's the size container of iodine I use.
Yeah.
That lasts me about a year.
How many mils or how much do you use per gallon when you make up a batch?
I don't know, man. I just make it look like
you just eyeball it. Okay. All right. Okay.
I mean, when you've been doing it as long as I have, there's no reason for me to sit down and measure it out exactly. I've been doing it so long, I know what it's supposed to look like. If it's a little bit weaker, a little bit stronger than normal, it's not that big of a deal, especially with iodine. You can go a 15-minute bath with iodine on pretty much any coral, and you're not going to kill it. Where some of these other types of dips, you got to adjust your dipping depending on the type of species of coral. Yeah. And that, I don't, just make it look like Arizona green tea. Give it 15 minutes in there, and you're golden.
That's funny you said tea, because I remember Luca, he said a similar thing when I was telling me his iodine.
He got that from me.
He's like, yeah, kind of like a weak tea color. That's like from you.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. That's funny. Okay, so yeah, I mean, so I was talking about the Indo side of these. There's the kind of jaw dropper type species, and I kind of feel like maybe fox flame is kind of the Indo rosaria as well, but I could be wrong on the species on that.
I've been going back and forth, and Jake and I used to go back and forth on the species of fox flame. It doesn't look anything like rosaria.
Not like the Aussie, no.
In my opinion, no. Again, all these regions, that's why so many species of acros are going to be coming out. What that species of, let's say, a fox flame actually is, I don't know. And fox flame's a finicky freaking coral for me. It's like one of the biggest pains in my asses.
Really?
I can grow it like a weed, but I can't get the freaking yellow tips to come in on it all the time.
Huh.
I have no idea what I'm doing wrong.
It could be too much light. It could be too much light. I think it's not a coral that loves crazy high par.
I grow it like crazy, and you know what? I'm gonna take the whole entire colony, and I have 2 levels in my farm systems. I'm gonna put it on the lower level where I know it's gonna only probably get about 350 to maybe 400 par,
Yeah.
depending on where I put it between. That's between two halides or right next to a halide. I might try that and see what happens.
Yeah. Give it a couple months and let me know if you see any difference. That'd be interesting.
I should notice
Yeah.
it. And usually when I do things and I change things, usually I can see a difference in like 2 weeks.
Mhm. Yeah.
So hopefully, I would notice that very quickly. But it's just weird though. I don't really have issues with colors coming out or not coming out with the methods that we've been doing in here. But I guess I can say certain corals, like we'll get into deep waters down the road, but I'm growing deep waters in 700 par.
Mm-hmm. They can adapt. It's true.
Oh, they do extremely. They grow like weeds too. Like normally they're slower growers, but they grow really fast with the amount of light that we're putting them in. But so it's a good one. I don't even remember what Jake and I were talking about when it came down to what the fox flame actually is.
Well, the reason I think is because I've seen in recent imports, Rosaria being this, it's known as golden jaw dropper is kind of a name for it. And it's like an orange coral with a yellow tip that's the same kind. It looks like fox flame, but it's like it's a different color morph version. That's what brought me to thinking maybe that's what fox flame is. But I haven't seen fox flame come in as a farmed coral. So,
I don't know where Jason got that coral.
Yeah.
I mean, he's had that thing for 15, 20 years. He's had that coral a long time. So
he seems to just pull things out of his ass. I don't know. I think the home record was just a little frag he grabbed and grew out too,
I think home record was given to him as a little fragment from an importer out in LA. And it was just something that was unique and nice, and he took it and grew it out.
Yeah. Trademark coral for sure. Yeah. Okay. So I'm not going to put these in the same difficulty category. I would say the Aussie Rosaria is, I would say
6.
I was going to say a 6 would be about right. And then personally for me, the Indo Rosarias, I would say to me are like a very beginner coral. Like they could be like a 2 or a 3. Yeah,
I agree.
And actually, something I was going to say about what you were saying too is like I think sometimes we think about a coral looking its best color-wise as being a full indication of health, but I think you can agree that sometimes a coral that's actually growing at its best is actually like, I don't know, sometimes when it's growing at its best, it's not its best color. Like I have some colonies that are just growing like mad, and they've looked better before, but they weren't growing like that fast.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, how do you know if a coral is just surviving or thriving?
Yeah.
One of the things polyp extension is one thing for sure. And then just making sure that your parameters are stable. And
elevated pH. That pH.
No, not elevated. Just a natural seawater. And that's the thing. I mean, are you working on pH? Or?
I do calc. Yeah, I mean, my low of the day is like 8.25 or something like that. So yeah,
that's not bad.
Yeah, and by elevated I mean elevated lows, not elevated overall. Yeah, elevated lows.
So keep your pH from being suppressed.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. I got Velita and Cicale are kind of in the same, I would say, similar categories. We got bonsais, we got the standard purple Velitas. They're one of those corals that if you're diving, and a lot of the corals when you're diving look brown or green, but these ones will jump out at you.
Yeah, I mean, Velitas are and Cicales are probably two of the most difficult corals from the wild to keep color. And I used to say it because I started ACI with Fiji corals. It was, I know Debbie and Walt for, a long time. And I started with selling sticks. It was all acro frags. And I was a poor hobbyist. I couldn't afford, a Tyree booger for $100. And I say, I can do this better and make it, and so that's where ACI came from. But I used to bring in, and I used to request no Velitas, no Cicales, and no tables.
No tables?
Because they were, and that was 18 years ago. They were the most difficult for me to keep good color in from Fiji. And it was only because it was Fiji. But I remember the Velitas and the Cicales that were coming in just being stupid bright and amazing. And then less than 2 weeks' time, you know, all the other corals are looking spectacular, and here they are turning into turds. You know, they're so brown that, you know, I wouldn't, you know, your worst customer, you know, you were giving a freebie to, you wouldn't give it to them.
Yeah, yeah, I don't even want it.
You know?
Yeah.
but you know, now with, you know, advances in husbandry practices for keeping reefs, and I attribute it to that is the, you know, the cleaner water, the better filtration options for people, and it's part of the reasons why they don't have issues like they used to. I got some in with my Fiji order, and they're just as beautiful. Well,
yeah,
I can't say they're as beautiful, but they look pretty daggone good. They're not like I remember. And that was over a month ago, and they still have good color. But for the average hobbyist, you know, that is getting into acros, they're going to be quite disappointed putting a Cicalia or a Velita in their aquarium as one of their first acros, because tricolors, everybody likes tricolors. And it's going to be a brown.
Well, I mean, I would generally put a bonsai type, which can be, I think, either of those species. I would recommend that often as a beginner acro. But maybe you have a different experience, obviously.
I say nowadays, for keeping it alive. Yeah. It's not a hard coral to keep alive, but keeping it thriving, they need really intense lighting, from my experience. Totally. I have I don't know how many colonies of Lolita tricolor just floating around, just trying to see which one I like the best for its growth and its color. And there are all kinds of different lighting. I have some that are just in my frag system, just getting minimal light for the majority of the day, but then there's a 4-hour peak where they're getting hit by some coral cares, and that's keeping the color on really nice. And I have to say that's been, you know, not the experience I had in the past, but it's what I'm getting now. And of course, I think it has a lot to do with what we're doing. Yeah,
I mean, everything's changed, and maybe there's certain corals that are just, back then were a little more difficult, and now they're just like, you know, easy peasy. Right. But but I would say they can tolerate lower par, like down to even like 200 or something, and still stay purple or blue or whatever color you want to call it. But you know, if they're really going to grow well and get super vibrant, then you can start hitting those, you know, 400 to, you know, plus into the Meckley range if you want.
Oh, there you go, Stubby. I was like, wait a minute, why don't you have like 3 of my favorite?
Oh yeah, no, we'll get to Stubby. We got a Stubby category. Okay.
You missed my favorite one of the Stubbies.
Well,
Samawensis.
Oh, I don't know if I probably know it to see it, but let's mention it.
It's like a humilis but thinner branching. So I guess you wouldn't categorize it as a stubby, because it actually grows more like a millie per se. But that same structure,
fingery structure.
Yes.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Blunt tips, rounded blunt tips.
Yeah. So the Velita Cicalia, that's how you say that. I'm going to put those as a 2 for care level for just easy acros. But what do you think?
I mean, if they have the right light, then I'd say that, you know, they're fairly easy. But if they don't have intense lighting, then I would say they're going to be on the harder side if you want coral.
Okay. That's fair. Hoaxamai is a really cool piece. The Tyree Blue Matrix is kind of the known coral in that category. What do you think? I find they can be difficult.
They're a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm being straight up there. I mean, Jake Adams collected one on the hard line of the Australian Barrier Reef with Vincent and Nick, and I have that coral. Jake had it in his systems, and it is a very finicky piece. Now, I think the reason why I still have problems with mine is because mine is, it went from Jake having it for 3 years growing from when I imported it for him, shipped it over to him, and then he had it for 3 years growing it out, all under LEDs. Now it's going back to my systems, and I'm having not crazy amount of problems with it, but I have a frag that he sent me back that still does not grow, and it's been in my system since 2022.
Crazy.
And I literally have, it's like, he always went out to Home Depot and Lowe's and bought those hexagonal tiles that you would put in, like backsplashes and stuff, and that's what he used for plugs, for tiles.
It's a good way to use for tiles,
it's still on that hexagonal plug. It's like 2 inches, 3 inches in diameter, and it's puttered over it. but it hasn't grown up at all and hasn't grown any branches off the base. So I'm getting ready to stab it. So
yeah, totally. Time to start stabbing. Yeah. I have noticed them to do really well, have great color, start to really take off. And then I've seen RTN happen in the base of some of it before, where it's just, there's no real indication of anything particular, going on around it. It just, yeah.
I really don't do good with the valley hoaxamais. And as a matter of fact, hoaxamai, you're gonna like this one, is abertonitis.
What do you mean? How so? Like
that's reclassified. It is no longer hoaxamai. It's abertonitis.
I mean, I think of abertonitis as a completely different looking coral.
Of course, big, thick, robust branches. Yeah. Well, abertonitis is now just robusta.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. That makes sense because I put robusta and abertonitis in the same line. So,
hoaxamai is now abertonitis.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, it's something I would say about it as a coral is I always thought it looked like a tenuis or Befaria that was kind of like a branching version. It's almost like a little bit of like a tenuis that wants to be a stag.
Yes, I see that, but I also I used to talk with Vincent about this. It's there's another acro that has real sharp coral legs, like a hoaxamai does. What the heck am I thinking of? It used to be classified as robusta. But it was the robusta that I remember was from Fiji, which is very similar to the one we call hoaxamai, but the one that was from Fiji had a more dense coral-like population on branches, not as spread out as the hoaxamai is. But they're such a finicky acro, man. I mean, I remember 20 years ago when I had my shop in Tampa and the Blue Matrix was, we got a tank breakdown. This guy had a huge, massive colony of the hoaxamai, the Blue Matrix, and we lost it all.
Oh, geez. Yeah.
And he took it from a tank that it thrived from a small piece in.
Yeah.
He grew into this massive colony, took it out of there, put it into our system, and within 2 weeks it was all dead.
Yeah. It can be so hard.
Cool.
Yeah. I mean, it was probably so adapted to that system and grown around the flow in that system, and then you try to move it, and yeah.
I used to get excited about tank breakdowns when I had a shop.
Yeah.
Until I had the last tank breakdown I did when I had my shop was a 450-gallon tank. And it was just chock full of amazing corals that were all grown from small fragments. And we took these, literally beach ball sized colonies of some of them and moved them into our shop. And if I thought we could keep them all, I had all this flow. We had 1,000-watt halides because the dude was running 1,000-watt halides. And I was like, this is going to be perfect for these corals.
Transition.
Within a few days, they all started RTNing from the inside out. We had to break them up into miniature little colonies. And we ended up losing our ass on that because almost all that stuff ended up dying because it just couldn't duplicate what the guy did.
Yeah. Sometimes a tank shutdown is too good to be true in some ways. It's like, seems like,
It is.
Yeah.
Well, lesson learned. If you do a tank breakdown and you love the beauty of those big-ass colonies, don't leave them whole because you'll lose them all.
Yeah.
Because you'll never be able to get them duplicated.
Exactly.
Just like wild acros and wild corals, when you bring in big wild corals, if they make it to you alive, they're difficult to keep alive.
Yeah, that was something actually Kenny Lynn was talking with me about. He said that any kind of like larger colony or whatever he brings in, he frags it immediately into several pieces to kind of give it more of a, it can make its own identity and find its own place in the world in its new home.
SPS is definitely important to do that if you're getting big colonies, unless you have crazy amounts of flow. I think this guy had like 12 Tunzi pumps in his aquarium.
Yeah.
Because 450, but he had 4 of them in corners that were on sea swirls, rotating back and forth. And
tons of variation.
There was so much flow in that aquarium. It was just, we were never duplicating it.
Yeah.
But if you ever get big colonies on a breakdown, break them apart.
Totally.
Don't try to keep them like they are because you love the beauty of that piece because you're going to hate it soon.
Yeah, totally. Okay, the next one. Oh yeah, so let's just say care level for hoaxamai. I'm gonna say like an 8.
Easy, 8, 9.
Okay,
it's up there.
Yeah,
It's up.
totally. It also doesn't ship well. That's another thing I remember
No.
when I used to ship it. It was one of the first ones to go if anything got a little delayed or cool or whatever. It was one of the first ones to go. So
I used to get mad at Vincent because he would send one stick with a tiny little bit of branching going across the top and a little bit of puddling on the plug. And I'm like, dude, why are you sending me a stick?
yeah, because it'll live.
Don't ship good. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly what he said. I'm like, well, it makes sense.
Yeah,
Totally makes sense.
that's funny. Yeah. Salago was the next one on my list, which is like, I think a really cool coral. It can be a little bit difficult.
Super cool. Very difficult.
Very
difficult.
widespread too, because I've seen the ones coming out of Malaysia. And they have a very similar look to the Indo ones. I think, I mean, to me, it seems like the same species.
It is. Salago is absolutely stunning if you get a good color morph piece.
Yeah, because they can be pink and yellow and all kinds of different colors for sure.
Care level is definitely on the very, very difficult in my opinion. Even the ones out of Indonesia that are farmed are somewhat difficult to keep.
Yeah.
If we're going to go to a scale right now, since we're talking about difficulty, I'd say that's up there in the
9 maybe
9 range.
Yeah.
Easy.
Yeah. And and we're talking long-term survival, growing a frag into a colony kind of success. Because I think, they come in and they do well for a while, but I think the tried and tested kind of pieces are a little harder to come by as far as long-term.
Exactly.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. I mean, if it was that easy, they wouldn't be expensive to purchase them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Yeah, but I mean, I would say pretty standard requirements as far as light, maybe a little less than like a milli or something. Like I've got a colony I'm keeping around 300, and it seems pretty good around there.
I would say it'd be fine.
They can probably handle more. They look like a fairly shallow species, but they are a little more open, as far as table.
They're definitely a
form.
shallow species. They're not something that they're finding down deep. From what I know about them. But again, every region's different, and they're finding corals in depths that they never thought they'd find them before, too.
Yeah, I've been hearing that. Yeah. I would also say they don't ship very well, is another thing.
No,
I know about them. So, yeah, but
they're thin branch. The branches are thin, and then they're also very dense with corallites. Again, it's another one of those corals that has a really dense corallite population for the size of the branch.
Yeah.
Of what it is. So more animals again per.
Yeah, so probably higher nutrient / food requirement overall.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Okay. So
You got another species listed next. The Ceramentosa is on top of my list. Is one of my favorite of all time acros. I used to get them from Fiji all the time.
Totally.
Bright green with the red tips.
Yeah.
Is that
We're kind of purpley pink tips. Yeah, they're beautiful. And I mean, we're going to start seeing a lot again. But unfortunately, something I would say about the species is that you don't see a lot of variation.
No.
It kind of just is what it is. Like, I think that it comes out of Australia as well. I've seen them from Australia be a little different. Like, I've seen more like cream colored ones with pink tips, but the standard Fiji ones are like that greeny teal color with the purple tips. And I would say they're a pretty easy coral. I would put them in the sort of 2 or a 3 difficulty.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. I just the reason why I was happy to see Ceramentosa on there is I know I've had a fragment that we were growing out for a while. I always put them in my one system. We just cook them for a while to see what they're going to do. Mm-hmm. And if it stays what we think it's going to be or it gets better, then my manager Dan goes, "What are you putting that thing over there for?" I'm like, "Just wait." Mm-hmm. And he came up to me, he's like, "What, are you going to put this thing on a tile or what?" And I'm like, "You were just bitching me out about 3 months ago about that coral." I said, "Now look at it. It was so bright green. The polyps are like a darker green."
Yeah, just body. A little darker than the body. Yeah.
But the tip is just like stupid bright red.
Yeah, it's a nice contrast for sure.
It is, and it's just a fragment that's got some nice branches coming off the main frag. So it's got this nice tight growth, and it's probably got like maybe 8 or 10 little branches growing off the tip of it. And that red just sets it off. I mean, the red and green is just...
it's a nice coral.
You can't go wrong with that coral. It's an easy coral to keep, too.
Yeah. I could almost have put it under the stubby category because those axial corallites are pretty stubby shaped. They're very rounded.
super thin branching compared to the stubby.
Yeah, not as
But I'm with you. I'm with you.
Yeah,
I'm with you.
but yeah, it's I think it likes high par if you really want to pull out that color tip.
Oh yeah.
It can handle a lot of par, but I've also I have a few pieces in my system that are off in the sides of the tank where they're getting 150 par, 200, and they still look pretty damn good. So
yeah.
I think it's pretty tolerant, and you're going to still get decent color, in a little lower par range. Yeah.
Sure.
But yeah, so difficulty, to agree, they're probably maybe a 3.
2, 3, yeah.
Yeah.
That's about right.
Yeah, and I would say they respond well to fragging, and yeah, you can kind of put them through hell, and they seem to do well. So, yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Cool.
So now
now I got the big controversial one here, the Malaysian Speciosa, or Batunai.
Yeah.
So this is the correct scientific name, which when you look at the
no
photos
longer
online,
Speciosa.
Yeah, Speciosa never seemed right, because when you compare it to the Indo Speciosa, which are, I think, a very deep water species, I mean, I could see how somebody might think maybe close enough, and then you can ship it ship it out and call it something. But
right.
Yeah, the Batunai. Okay, I gotta get this. I gotta internalize this. Batunai. So I think we said before, these are probably a 10 on the difficulty scale, maybe an 11.
100%.
Can the amp go to 11 on this one?
Well, I'm still trying to figure them out myself. I mean, I've gotten so many fragments from so many different people, and I've not really been able to keep any of them alive any long term.
Mm-hmm.
I got some Batunais from Indonesia that were just mind blowing colors. Red and yellow and on the tip of the axial coral lights, and on the other coral lights, absolutely stunning. And I'm actually getting polyp extension now, but I had to go through the first batch that I got in. I lost them all in 4 days.
Yeah.
And I'm going, what the hell? They came in, they look great.
But the polyps are small when they come in. The polyps are not very they don't extend very much. They don't seem to have the ability to capture nutrients, so they're quite vulnerable in that first period. And if you can get them through that, they get a better mechanism to capture nutrients essentially over time. But you got to break through that period.
You do, and what I've been doing with mine, every single day they go into, instead of making my iodine bath look like green tea, I make it look like black tea.
Yeah.
I mean, super crazy amounts of iodine going. I mean, I can actually tell you from my iodine container, I use just a standard, I don't think I have any around here, just a standard ball pipetter.
Mm-hmm.
So the little bulb on it, and the long tube is about that long.
Yeah.
It probably holds about 1 mil to 2 mils of water.
Yeah.
And I will pull that up 3 times in 3 gallons.
Okay.
And it gets really dark, like black tea.
Yeah.
And I'll let them sit in there for 15 minutes, and actually they're still kicking.
Wow.
I had them for over a week.
Yeah. And you said you do those dips for the first chunk of time once a week or something, or?
I'm going to keep doing them until I see, great polyp extension. I mean, I see polyp extension, and I see small amounts of recession on each of the colonies, but it's not like it was the first time I got them in, and it was just overnight they were gone.
Just poof. Yeah.
This is a little teeny bit of recession. I'm like, oh shit, gotta dip them again. So I'm dipping them daily, and I did that for was it 5 days, 6, 7? No, it's 8 days now, and I'm still not happy. I'm still gonna continue to dip them. I'm giving them a rest over the weekend.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping I don't come in on Monday and see them. Toasted.
Yeah. I think both of us are pretty new to them, but my experience is. Obviously, I've lost some of the ones I brought in. I have a couple that were from the first batch that I think have proven themselves at this point. So I've sold a couple frags, but I really didn't want to sell any until I was at least a few months in,
Yeah. I won't even. That coral is going to be in my possession for a year or two before.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, part of it too is I want to spread it around a little bit. If I think I have a strain that's starting to get tank hardened, I'll send it to a couple people that I know are experienced hobbyists. Yeah. And if it does well for them, then maybe that will be a strain that, gets harder and harder in our tanks,
Yep.
Yeah, can only hope. But yeah, lighting wise, I think that they can handle pretty high power, but I don't think they need it. I think they can probably be in 300 to 400 and get, some of the better color. But
that was the other thing that I did.
Mhm.
That's the other thing I did different this time. Instead of putting them in with my other acros like I normally do, I put them in my packing table that's got lights over it, and it's like maybe 60 par. So I don't know if that has anything to do with it or not, or if it's just the iodine dipping. I talked to my supplier, and he's had them for months, no issues. And I'm asking him how he's keeping them, and he's keeping them in pretty heavy flow, and par level is only like 200. And so I was like, okay, I'm only at 270. That shouldn't have been that big of a difference, but I guess it can be. But his nutrient level is substantially lower than my wild coral system. So now I have them in like, 60 par and higher nutrients. So that's maybe the key when I bring them in, because I'm not going to put them in my farm system because I have no idea what they have on them.
Yeah, that's a good point. Different bacteria strains on their microbiome that could, spread to other things. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, totally. Well, and I've heard, it would be interesting if someone had a system that was just Malaysian corals and no other corals had ever touched that tank from any part of the world. Did you think there'd be a better chance of those corals surviving?
Who knows? Yeah. I mean, that's nobody will ever know that answer because of the cost that's involved with figuring out microbiome of regions.
We're just a silly hobby at the end of the day, right? I mean, nobody's going to put that money in. Yeah.
I mean, I'm with you. I mean, I know that everything that I do is all considered anecdotal by science, but if I have 9 systems I'm doing it in, then I'm sorry, but the proof's in the freaking pudding. I got 9 systems. It's not 10 for control and this and that, but if it's working, it's working. If you want to call it anecdotal, call it anecdotal.
Yeah. I should probably
more controversy.
Yeah. Yeah. That's all right. There's a little weaved Meckley controversy worked in here. Yeah, I think we're going to have to call this part 1 and then come back, because this is probably going to be like a 3-part series at this point, because we're like only halfway through the acro list here. And, and then we've got so many other things to do, Monties and then LPS, softies. So yeah, let's, if you're cool to do it again, let's just plan another one. And I think it'd be fun. Another one. Cool.
Can't promise you it's going to be next weekend, but
that's fine.
We'll definitely, we can put this out. People, I want more. I have to wait till Chris is ready.
Yeah.
No, cool. I mean, I'd be happy to do it again another time.
Yeah, sounds good, man. I appreciate you making time on your Saturday night. It's awesome to chat with you as per usual. Cool, man. Okay, well, let's touch base, and I'll talk to you soon.
Well, keep up the great work what you're doing up here in Canada.
Yeah.
Try to keep up the great work here too. So.
Yeah, we all try. Okay, thanks, man. Okay,
no problem, buddy. Have a good one.
Talk to you soon. Okay, bye. Thanks for joining me for another episode of Beyond the Reef. Make sure to stay tuned for the other episodes coming out in this series. There will be at least 2 more, so we're looking forward to those for sure. If you're a retailer in the US and you're looking for wholesale of awesome corals, you definitely should check out ACI Aquaculture.com and set up an account there. And as per usual, if you have any suggestions for future guests, want to just ask us a question, make a suggestion, make a criticism, whatever you want to say, feel free to reach out at beyondthereefpod@gmail.com. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and leave us a review. And if you're looking for high-quality aquacultured corals in Canada, please check us out at fraggarage.ca. Hope to hear from you soon.